Welcome back to Math Addict 59 YouTube channel. So in pre-calculus, you're going to see a lot of lessons in regards to reference angles. And reference angles are a way you can arrive at trig values without having to resort to a calculator. Like for instance, you already know stuff about 30-degree angles. From the last lesson, you realized that sine of 30 was a half and cosine of 30 was square root 3 over 2. But what's going to happen in today's lesson is you're going to run into situations where, let me just draw this again. You're going to be on a coordinate plane and you're going to find out that there is an angle out here that has very similar ratios. But this particular angle is actually angle 150 degrees. So what you'll find out eventually is that the 150 degree has a corresponding measure and you see it on the Cartesian plane. And there's also, you'll also realize when you study these further that this angle also corresponds to ordered pairs. Like the 30-degree angle, if you were measuring an angle with an initial side or a terminal side of 1 unit, you would find out that the x value involved is square root 3 over 2 and the y value involved is 1/2. Now, in terms of the 150-degree angle, you're going to realize that upon further review, this particular angle also has a y value of 1/2. But the cosine of this angle, because we're in quadrant 2, is a negative. So you're going to find out that the measures, the sine and cosine of 150, it just comes down to having similar measures to sine of 30 and cosine of 30, but you have to take into account the part of the Cartesian plane that that angle is terminating in. Now, if you actually wanted to realize that 150 reference angle is 30, make sure you understand that the angle that's in red subtracted from 180 would lead you to the reference angle. So just as another point in regards to reference angles, let's say you were at, this was 120 degrees. So if you want the reference angle for 120, I'm hoping you're going to just follow the visual and just realize that 120 is going to have this angle here and that the two reference angles always add up to 180. So to get the reference angle for 180, you would always, for 120, you would subtract 180 minus 120, and the reference angle would be 60. If you had a strange measure, like say 164, once again, if you wanted the reference angle for 164, since you're in quadrant 2, you're going to do 180 minus 164, and it's going to be this angle. But once again, use your eyes. Don't just use formulas to arrive at these reference angles. In this particular case, the measures of 164 would correspond to the measures at 16, except that once again, your cosine would be negative and your sine would be positive. Now that was the situation for quadrant 2. If I wanted to go to something in quadrant 3, like let's say I have an angle like 225 in quadrant 3, the reference angle would just be the angle pointing in the other direction. And that angle would be 45 degrees. So if you're in quadrant 3, you could just subtract 180. Now, if you have a situation in radians, you would subtract pi. Now, it might help you in some of these problems, just go ahead and turn them all into degrees just to make the math easier, since sometimes it's difficult to deal with fractions. But that's a situation with quadrant 3, you would subtract 180. Now, if you had a situation in the fourth quadrant, like let's say you had something that was 330 degrees, my strong suggestion to you would be to determine the negative of that angle. And you should realize that in quadrant 4, if your angle's in quadrant 4, it's going to get subtracted from 360. See, the negative angle is going to be 30 degrees. But what you want to do is you want to go to this angle here, which is your actual reference angle. And that would be 30 degrees. So in the case of angle in quadrant 4, you could just take a 330 and subtract from 360. Now the formulas are also all listed in your handout. But once again, try not to focus too much on formulas. Try to focus more on visual representations to determine reference angles. So let's say, for instance, going back to what we did a little while ago, what if we wanted to find tangent to 40? So you would draw your 240 degree angle, and then you would realize that it's going to correspond to this reference angle. Sorry about my poor drawing skills. It's probably not going to get better if I draw it again. So I'm just going to go ahead and use the arrows to indicate. Yeah. So anyway, make sure you realize that this reference angle, and you should be just drawing this every time without too much fail. This reference angle is going to be 240 subtract 180 for a total of 60. So this is going to be 60 degrees. And what you're going to realize about tangent is that because tangent is positive in quadrant 3, that tangent 240 is actually equal to tangent 60. And then you would go back and refer to the fact that tangent 60 is sine of 60 divided by cosine of 60, which turned out to be, based on your table, square root 3 over 2 divided by 1/2, which is going to correspond to square root of 3. Because what's going to happen is if they're both halves, you could just cancel out the halves. So this tangent would actually be square root of 3. So that's an example of using a reference angle to determine a ratio. You may also get some crazy problems where they want you to find, say, the cosine of 480. Now you're going to find out later 480 degrees is what they call a coterminal angle. And anytime you're in a coterminal angle, you're going to find out that there is another angle that corresponds on the unit circle, and that's 120. And you get to that 120 by subtracting 360. So now we know that what we're really dealing with, it's cosine 120. Now for the reference angle for 120, once again, just keep in mind that it's going to be this angle here, which is 60 degrees. So we're going to go ahead and we're going to come up with the 60 degrees. So, and because cosine is negative in quadrant 2, you have to make the statement that it's equal to negative cosine 60. So make sure you state that that's a negative value, and then your table will tell you that cosine of 60 is 1/2. So cosine of 120 would be negative 1/2. I'll probably make some more videos for this class, but just make sure you keep tuning in. And if you see more, if you have any suggestions for videos, please feel free to email me at my Alamo Edu address. If you're not sure about that, you can also email me through Canvas. Thank you. Ooh, that was